And I don't think there's any need to remove women from guidance. You can just say women and trans men, for example, if you want to be inclusive and accurate.
We've put the Ming vase into our political cliche bin, but it is fair to say Labour are still trying hard to avoid anything that could stop them securing their longed for and potentially very large majority. So they probably won't be glad to see their gender policies on the front pages again. The Times reports the party plans to make it easier to get a gender recognition certificate. That follows JK Rowling telling the Times the party she used to support has abandoned women. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson's answers about whether children should be taught there are two biological sexes also made the news. Let's speak now to the Shadow Secretary for Health, Wes Streeting. Good morning to you.
Morning.
We're very pleased to have you, Wes Streeting, on the show. A lot of our listeners have said, though, they've noticed you're on quite a lot on the media round. Is that because you're trusted more than your colleagues? Why do we get more of you than we do, say, Angela Rayner or David Lammy? What's the thinking behind that?
Give the people what they want. That's what I always say. No, I mean, in all seriousness, the Labour Party is putting health front and centre of this election campaign because it is one of the top two issues that voters consistently tell us they care about. Contrast that with the Conservatives. But the only place I've seen the Health Secretary is in newspaper pieces talking about her leadership campaign and her leadership ambitions. Rishi Sunak couldn't be running faster away from his record, faster than he's running away from the bookmakers. I mean, this is not serious for a party that is currently in government and presiding over the worst crisis in the history of the NHS. But we're very proud to put the NHS front and centre of our campaign. We're proud to run on the record of the last Labour government of the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history. And we're proud to stand on the plan that we have at this election to rebuild our country's NHS.
You've done a lot of thinking on issues to do with gender, Wes, in your time. How does it feel to you when a figure like JK Rowling says Labour, your party, has abandoned women?
I'm pretty depressed, to be honest. I have a lot of respect for JK Rowling, both in terms of what she's done for children and literacy, but also the work that she's done campaigning for women and in particular violence against women and girls. I think that we've clearly got more work to do to rebuild trust with people that we've lost on this issue. I do think the Labour Party is in a better place. I actually think our national conversation's in a better place than we have been. And I actually do feel very optimistic and hopeful that we can find a way through what has at times been a toxic conversation where women have felt silenced, trans people have felt beaten up by headlines. And I think we can find a way through that both treats trans people with the dignity and respect that they deserve, and also treats women with the respect that they deserve, particularly protecting women's spaces, women's voices, and right to speak up. So when women like JK Rowling do speak up, I think it's important we engage seriously with the arguments that she's making, with the concerns that she has. And also we listen to what trans people are saying about the everyday injustices and indignities that they're experiencing too, whether that's hate crime or poor provision in public services.
It is scarcely credible, though, not for you, because you've been relatively clear on this subject all along, Wes Street. I mean, Keir Starmer did say, he denied that only women have cervixes. He denied it. When Rosie Duffield said it, he said she was wrong. People remember that, don't they?
I think what Keir has been trying to do on this, I think we all have, is to try and respect the fact that there are people whose gender identity is different from their biological sex, and to try and be as inclusive as possible. I think at times in pursuit of inclusion, we've ended up in a position where women have felt excluded, biological women have felt excluded. And there are practical examples of this in terms of things like NHS language and documentation, and actually this is not just about point of principle, it's about some of the practical challenges as well. If, for example, the NHS ran a campaign or sent out invitations for cervical smear tests and said this test is for people with cervixes, I dare say there'd be a lot of women who, whether through language barriers or poor education, wouldn't know they have a cervix and would get missed out. It's really important in public health messages that you're on the nose with your messaging. So, and I don't think there's any need to remove women from guidance. You can just say women and trans men, for example, if you want to be inclusive and accurate. So I just think we've sometimes, and we've seen this inequality debates in the past, sometimes being well-meaning and well-intentioned can have unintended consequences. And I think that's where we've ended up with this discussion.
That's probably what Labour got wrong in the past. There's kind of, I mean, I don't want to use the word woke, but it's kind of there to be used. There's kind of a hunger to be woke, to be right on, and it's ended up actually you in the wrong place, and Starmer's had to shift from it. I mean, he has shifted. He's changed his opinion. He's changed his view on biological facts. He has moved from being someone who didn't want to say a woman was a woman to someone who wants to say it now. That is, I mean, and he has to accept that, doesn't he? He has shifted ground.
I think lots of us have, and we've been genuinely listening, and that's the sort of the reassurance I would provide to people who've been campaigning on this for a long time. We have been listening, and yes, there has been a terrible degree of toxicity and some really ugly language used and directed to the point where people have felt vilified and really attacked for their positions on gender identity, whether they are some of the most prominent feminists in the country or whether they are trans rights campaigners. And I think where we've got to as a party is a place where we've sort of cut through the noise and the toxicity and seriously listened and engaged with people's concerns, whether that's on the support for children and young people, where we strongly support the CAS review and will implement it if we form the next government, or indeed the contributions that people have made around the Equality Act and recognising the difference and the importance of biological sex and not simply gender identity. And those that does matter. It is important. And I think we're in a much better place as a party and in a position actually to bring our country together. I was really proud of the answer that Keir gave in the TV debate last week, when he talked about bringing the country together, and that's where we want to be. That's where I want us to get to.
Let's talk briefly about tax if we can, Wes Streeting. There was a story over the weekend about Labour's tax plans in The Guardian. It says plans exist to raise money by changing capital gains tax and inheritance tax. These plans have already been drafted and are considered. Have you seen such plans? Are you aware of such plans?
No, and nothing in our manifesto requires any of those policies. Of course, people send policy submissions in all the time, and we went through a rigorous process through the national.
But you're not considering capital gains tax and inheritance tax in that way.
No, and look, we've been playing whack-a-mole on tax now for weeks in this election campaign, where every day the Conservatives put up in lights a new tax they say Labour would want to raise.
This was The Guardian. It was based on a leak. I mean, this wasn't the Tories, I don't think the Tories were speaking through The Guardian. The Guardian was saying they'd seen some discussions on it, and that's where it came from.
But Jeremy Hunt's out talking about inheritance tax because he's under pressure from the Lib Dems in his Surrey constituency and is fighting for his political survival. But we, as I say, we've been playing whack-a-mole on this. We don't mind the scrutiny, but it's also really important to scrutinise the Conservatives' tax plans because they don't add up, and we are genuinely concerned that people will wake up to a nightmare on Downing Street on the 5th of July if they assume this election is already decided, and if they don't take seriously the threat of a fifth term of Conservative government and the risk of a budget that's like Liz Truss's mini budget on steroids because they've got tens of billions of pounds of unfunded spending cuts.
Here's another one for you to whack 'em on if you'd like. Claire's got in touch to say she's very worried about you getting rid of the higher rate of tax relief on pension contributions. Is that a thing you can whack down, or is that being considered?
Well, look, we've been clear on this, particularly in relation to the lifetime allowance. We don't want to be in a position where we're deterring people from making a really big contribution to our country, particularly through the NHS. We've listened to concerns and we've responded.
You're not going to get rid of the higher rate of tax relief on pension contributions?
That's not in our manifesto.
But Wes, we've had this conversation before. Not in our manifesto is not the same as you're not considering it.
No, look, we've been through, I mean, in terms of things we've considered, we've been through a really rigorous policy-making process. And it was a high bar to get into Labour's manifesto. If it's not there, it's not happening.
Just finally, we're going to talk. We've had the betting scandal with the Tories. Just had Chris Heaton-Harris on earlier today, and just wanted to tell you what he said to us. He criticised Pat McFadden for trying to lean on the Gambling Commission. He said you were putting undue influence on the Gambling Commission, overstepping the mark in an inappropriate fashion because you were trying to over-politicise and force them into revealing the names of people being investigated. Overstepping the mark and leaning on the Gambling Commission.
I mean, the audacity of the Conservative Party to hide behind the Gambling Commission, to not answer straightforward questions of the Prime Minister about who knew what, who's implicated, who's under investigation, and what he's going to do about it. Pat McFadden's letter to the Gambling Commission is entirely reasonable, and I think people should greet with enormous suspicion the fact that the Conservatives are trying to cover up in the middle of an election campaign which of their candidates is under investigation for serious wrongdoing. I think it's important for them to be transparent, to be honest, to be upfront. But of course, transparency, honesty and accountability are alien terms to a Conservative Party that has moved so far from the party of Churchill, Macmillan and Thatcher. This Conservative Party wouldn't know honesty if it slapped them in the face. And it's one of many reasons why I hope they'll be removed on the 5th of July. But of course, that only happens if people vote for change on the 4th of July.
Wes Streeting, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Wes Streeting there, the Shadow Health Secretary.